Welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast by Scott McDonald and drdemographics.com, the best source of demographic, psychographic, and marketing information for professionals.
Hello, this is Scott McDonald at drdemographics.com, and we're here for our video podcast about locations with promise. Now, this is a two-part episode, so to speak. Last week, we discussed the places with the kiss of death in 2022. There are some places you ought to avoid, and we went through those. It's a rather lengthy list. But this week, we want to talk about places that have promise, the places in the United States that I think are worthy of a second look for you. These are locations that are growing or have some other benefits to them that you ought to check out. So I hope you will. Now, there are some people who are disappointed that I am not talking about a specific intersection on a map, for example. But it's close enough, I think, that you can get an idea of locations that I think really deserve a look. And I also want to say, last year, they were different than this year because the variables, the factors, in other words, that make an area good are a little bit different. And so, as you'll note, year to year, the numbers and the desirability of a particular site changes. That's the name of the game. So, let me share with you my screen. Now, please be aware, this is a free service. It's not something I'm charging for. Obviously, at Dr. Demographics, we want you to buy a report, and we can tell you more specifically about what locations in the area are going to be best for you to consider. That's the business that we're in. But I think it's very helpful to get some free information out there to tell you about places that I think are deserving of consideration. So these are locations with promise. These locations are not all the best places to live or to practice in the United States. They're going to be good, but they're not exclusively only the good places. There are some that are going to be reasonably good that are not on the list. Also, I want you to understand that they may be smaller areas than those with the kiss of death, and they're more varied. So in other words, if I come up with a list and I'm showing you places to consider, I want you to understand sometimes places that have promise are going to be smaller geographically than the places that I want you to stay away from. So where should you be looking? What makes a place with promise location? So I want you to understand these are the factors that I think you need to consider in 2022. The risks associated with these locations are going to be lower than places that are not on the list. But that implies that there are some risks in any place. Because right now, and I'll mention this a few times, it looks like we're heading into a recession. We know that some locations are not going to be as well profitable. At least they're going to take more effort to be profitable otherwise. So I just want to be honest with you. Still, I think these are going to be places that if you give them a shot and do your research, you'll realize they're looking pretty good. There are still risks, granted, but they are within reason. So that is a presumption I want you to keep in mind. The population is increasing in almost every one of these areas, and that's unlike those locations like the kiss of death, where in almost every case, they're losing population. So remember, the business of Dr. Demographics is to give you an idea of places that we think you ought to look and get some evaluation on. That doesn't mean that every location is going to be right for every doctor in every practice. But I think you'll understand pretty quickly what it is that I consider to be important and useful for you. Now, there are obvious reasons to attract new residents to these areas, okay? obvious reasons. And one of those is the cost of living. And right now, the cost of living has gone up dramatically in some locations. And now this includes the cost of energy and taxes and other factors that you have to keep in mind. But I also think that there are some other things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to the cost of living. The affordable and available housing that one can own is very desirable in these locations. So some of the places you're going to say, wow, that's kind of unusual. But remember, if seen through the lens of what you can afford and what is available, that's why it's a good place. Now, I also want you to understand something. I'm presuming that a middle-class location for most practices is going to be highly desirable versus an area which is very rich or very poor. Now, there's some people who only want to work with the rich. I think it's more important to consider when you're in practice to look at locations where you can become rich by serving the largest population or one that is increasing. So generally speaking, middle-class locations with lots and lots of people, particularly new residents, are going to be better for your practice than going to a place where you're only working with an elite or a population that is very poor that is being subsidized by government or other programs. So I'm aiming for the middle. I'm looking for the top of the bell curve on your behalf. I also want you to understand space has to be an issue. Now, I say this because there are some people who recognize that as you're looking for locations to practice, there are some places that it's very hard to find an office location that is a reasonable price, but also that you could build or start from scratch. And so for that reason, yes, I think it's great if you can find practices for sale. But in our economy right now, you're going to finding space that is affordable may in fact be more important than finding practices for sale, because they are becoming a little rare and a little riskier. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is employment availability. There are some places where there is very little employment, very few jobs that are being listed. And that is because distance working has become a big thing right now. A lot of people are moving out of state or at least looking out of state for jobs when in fact they ought to be looking for some place that is reasonably close to where they want to live. Where you live and where you work have got to be kind of locked together. I'm not saying that distance employment is not going to work. I think in a lot of cases it is. But I'm just saying, kind of remember, they're not divorced from each other. Now, this may sound a little bit kind of dumb of me, but look, values are important when it comes to where you go. And I mean by that, you look for a place that has lower crime. You look for a place that it's easy to have family formations. And I mean, people get married and have kids, and that's where they want to live. Those are what they call values neighborhoods. And this tends to increase the longevity that you see within that area. Now, longevity means people are going to stick around for a long period of time. In dense urban areas, there was a time in which it was very, very hard to find a rent-controlled apartment or one that was subsidized. So people stayed for a long time. Right now, those dense urban places are not quite as desirable. They don't have the values, and therefore people are kind of moving in and moving out very quickly. I want you to get into an area where you can increase the value of your relationship with the patient base. I don't care what kind of practice that you're in, whether you're a general dentist or a physician, whether you're a chiropractor or a veterinarian. The values location is helpful to you because longevity within practice and the length of time you're going to serve your patient base is a good thing. Also, When the barometer reads that this is an area that has growth and development for business, not just for a population, that's good for you. So, do I think that it's great to have a place that shows this is going to be a wonderful place for shopping or for business? I like to find that, but I also think you have to take into account the residential characteristics. How much do people pay for their housing? How long are they going to stick around? And what kind of housing they're going to want? So I'll talk about that in just a minute. Stick with me. Relax. Now, there are changing standards of acceptable sites. As I mentioned before, there was a time in which you needed to go to a densely populated area because those were the places where there was high-rise office buildings and they were affordable. That meant there were a lot of employees in those areas. Right now, that market condition has changed. Now, the market conditions, and I mean by this, the priorities and the exigencies are going to tend to shift. There are three. Finding a place that has employment is still desirable. It doesn't mean that you have to be right next to large employers, but I'm going to say large commutes, long commutes, are not popular. That's largely because the price of gasoline has risen so much. Oh, sure, maybe you got a Prius. Well, lucky you. But the majority of people don't have that. And therefore, finding a place where there is employment and residential desirability is good. Also, I want you to understand when I'm putting this list together, the population character, and there are several things I mean by this: ethnography, growth, density, languages, etc., are going to help you. Now, I bring this up every once in a while that there is a great place, and I won't tell you where it is, where there are lots of Armenians. Now, Armenians are good because they're very hardworking, very family-oriented, and kind of clannish, if you will. They can be exceptionally good. They all tend to go to church together, by the way, these Armenians. Now, I like the Armenian population, and if you happen to be Armenian, you know where those places are. The same thing is true of being Greek or maybe Hispanic, or if you speak Portuguese. You know, there is a benefit to being part of the ethnic group that is there. That's because demographic character, the population tends to grow more in that ethnicity. So being in a profession that, like healthcare, where you're going to depend upon referrals and the demographic character of the population will matter, knowing the demographics and the population character, like their ethnography and language group, is a good thing for you. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm looking to recommend locations that have a great deal of density, lots and lots of people clustered together. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that of a population that has similar character, they will tend to cluster together, and that's a good thing for you. There are some other things that I want to keep in mind. Medical conditions tend to be a manifestation of the demographics of the population. And I'll give you an example. If you happen to serve children or adolescents or 20-somethings or older people, the medical conditions they have is closely tied to their age, but it's also tied to other factors, including the population's character. The delivery of those services will tend to be different for the population you're trying to serve. So if you're in a retirement community and they're young retirees, like in their 50s and 60s, the medical conditions that they tend to have in common will be greater. If they are seniors, I mean much older people, people who are in their 70s and 80s, their medical conditions are going to be different. If you want to make a lot of money as a healthcare provider, I don't care what that field is, you'll know that you're going to be successful if you can understand the population based upon its medical conditions, the procedures that you're offering, and how to deliver those effectively. I hope you understand. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I am trying to say how you have to consider practice in order to build a practice quickly and efficiently, given the demographics of the population. Now, Dr. Demographics doesn't just say, oh, there's no competition in this area, go there. What we're trying to do is say, if you have the desire to have a practice and you're going to try to do these particular procedures and deliver them in this manner to a population, you've got to know what that population is. And that's where we can help you. It cuts down the length of time that it takes to build the practice up. No matter where you are, you have to understand these factors. Now, there are a few other things that I want you to understand. The economic conditions of the country are not the same everywhere. And in fact, the demographics are a manifestation of economic conditions. There are kinds of people who work in certain professions and they're networked together, and you need to understand what they're like. That's where we can help you. The other thing that I want you to understand is the housing type matters. Now, you know that condominiums and townhouses, retirement communities, two-bedroom apartments for young couples, these kinds of things will matter in reflecting what kind of practice you will have and how quickly you can build it up. Knowing who lives and what kind of housing they have will make a big difference for you. Just remember, just because people rent doesn't mean they're all renting the same kinds of housing, that they're paying the same amount, that they have the same kind of lease or mortgage. The other thing I want you to understand is taxation. The nature of taxation in each area is a manifestation, believe it or not, of demographics. What kinds of taxes people have, how they've structured their taxes. That will matter to your success and will be a precursor to determine how likely you're going to succeed and how quickly. There's something that I'm going to get in trouble for, and I'm going to bring it up anyway. And that is the political condition. And I mean what politics people have. There are some places that are not going to have a political condition that is favorable to you. I'm not saying people are going to dislike your politics, but I'm going to say it's a manifestation of their lifestyle, their demographic character, what they want, and what the economic conditions in the area will be like, because that is a reflection of the political character of the area. I hope I don't have to go too much into it, but if you want to get on the phone and talk about it, well, Mike Green knows a lot about this. Now, the definition of geographic boundaries is something that is kind of in flux right now. I didn't realize when I started working in Louisiana that if you're on the wrong side of the river, you are never going to get those people from the opposite shore. There's no way to get across the river. There are some people who are in a mountainous areas. And if you know what the Cuesta Grade is, you know it may as well be on the other side of the earth. The Cuesta Grade is in California, by the way. Understanding then what makes a geographic boundary and what people consider to be too far away or not a reasonable boundary for them will save you so much grief if you understand it. And that's what we're trying to help you. There's a difference between San Antonio and Houston. With that in mind, there's a reason why the geographic boundaries are set up in Texas the way they are. So we want to help you. And competition ratios are likely to change a great deal in this market right now. There used to be a time in which people would say, for dentists, you need to have one dentist per 2,500 people. That's a little crazy right now. So the ratio doesn't have any meaning. And it also is a reflection of the demographic character of the population. Some people do not want to drive any distance at all. They want to be right next door to the office. Some people don't mind driving, or some people believe that having an office close to their place of work is much more important than being close to their place of residence. These competition ratios are going to matter about what makes a successful practice. Now, I'm bringing all these standards up because they're going through some changes, and I want you to understand them. But as I start talking about specific places, I'll try to bring in these standards so you'll understand what I mean. Therefore, you need to understand that viability and potential of a location needs to be examined year to year, because what was good last year may not be good next year. And I'll give you an example is Orange County, California. We know that the freeways that have moved in, they grew up and they changed. But what side of the freeway you lived on and what off ramps you took really mattered. And that is also going to be true in Florida. It's also going to be true, well, in fact, in almost every state, particularly where there's a large and growing population. Viability and the potential needs to be examined because the factors that determine viability and potential are shifting right now. If you don't understand it, you're going to get locked in with a demographic company that doesn't understand how to examine the demographic variables. I can tell you what those companies are, but that just makes me sound petty. Yesterday, the winner may make a comeback, but for different reasons. Now, yesterday's good site may be good and it may grow, but it may not be good and growing for the same reason as it did last year. That's really what the point of this misspelled line is. There are reasons why places with potential are coming back. And there are reasons why some of them are not. Now, some of the doctors that we've recommended locations for who kind of delayed and didn't move on them are a little upset because they're going, but it's not a good site anymore. And I'm going to tell you, that is true because every variable, every factor is going to shift. So if you want a place with potential, you got to understand striking while the iron is hot matters. You can't delay. Practice areas tend to live by will alone. Now, this is a very confusing sentence, and let me tell you what I mean. There are some places that are dying by suicide and some places that are growing out of sheer will alone. If you look at some communities, and I'm going to give you places in Idaho, for example, that are all of a sudden showing tremendous growth. You have to say, why? There's not a lot of new housing there. There's not exceptionally low taxes. Why is it doing well? Well, sometimes you have to look at the attitude of the consumers and what they consider to be important. So as I look around the country, and by the way, I travel a great deal in looking at locations, I'm going to tell you, some locations are going to be great because the people want them to be great. And there's no other reason for it. Your priorities are not shared by everyone, though. I want you to understand that. Believe it or not, lots of folks want locations to win. People have always been surprised by Texas. They're going, how come San Antonio and Austin have done so well? Well, there is an attitude that exists that I have seen firsthand with people who live and develop those areas. They want them to grow. They want them to have success. College Station, Texas, for example, is in a crummy little place. I don't like it very much, but it is a place, nevertheless, that people want to live and they like their neighbors. The same thing is true in several places in Colorado, and I won't get into them right now. I'll just simply say people in these little towns, and they're primarily in valleys in Texas, are doing really well because they just want them to. There are other places that are kind of sitting back going, prove it to me, make it good. Well, it's not a very good idea. They're becoming economic gardens. Now, I use that term because there are people who want to be entrepreneurs. It isn't because some outside force has said, this is the place to go. I've been a little surprised in parts of New Jersey that have done really, really well. I think there are parts, and there are not many, but parts of Philadelphia that are doing well because people wanted to. Crime is low because people wanted to. Other parts of Philadelphia and parts of New Jersey aren't doing well because the attitude of residents is bad. They are not forming a garden area, a place that is willing to grow. And I say this because there are some practices that will come in and really get who their audience is. And I'm going to say something kind of silly here. One of the things I have found that works well in some residential areas, suburbs, is Halloween. It's your attitude on Halloween, and the local high school basketball team for the girls. Sometimes you're going to find it's related to country clubs or golf courses. In other words, the market segments are expanding because people like their relatives. They like the patient base. And I can help you, and Mike Green can help you figure out the best places to go if we will only know what kind of market segment you want to fit into. But it's not something you can only do on a piece of paper. It has to do with lifestyle and what your expectations are. Now, let's talk a little specifically about places that are showing promise. Yeah, I'm going to spill the beans. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and tell you places that I think are good. These are states with promise. I'll talk about other units of geography later. Idaho surprised the heck out of everybody. The population's increased more and faster than in any other state in the United States. And I'm not talking about all over Idaho. I'm talking specifically of Western Idaho and Southern Idaho. People have an attitude there. It grew 6.26% last year. Now, it's got very low crime. Housing is affordable. Taxes are very low, and there's a lot of room for quality of life. By the way, I went to the Shakespeare Festival in Greater Boise, and it was spectacular, actually. Now, you may not think of Boise and Shakespeare festivals, but people are trying to keep their act together, serve their neighbors, and they want to make a long-term commitment to the state. Idaho's doing great, and the growth is reflecting it. So let's talk about another place with promise. Nevada. It grew 5.34% last year. If you retire to Nevada, you're lucky because Nevada has pretty good health care and it is affordable. There's no state income tax. Jobs are plentiful, by the way, and I'm saying it wasn't always that way. It is now, however, but I'm saying Nevada, and I'm talking about Reno, Sparks, and I'm also talking about Las Vegas, Clark County, is doing pretty darn well. Surprisingly, even Wendover is showing signs of life. Housing prices are affordable. Now, part of the reason for that is a lot of people who are retired didn't want to spend a huge amount of money on it, and they wanted to be close to California without having California's regulation and government. Remember, California isn't doing well because California doesn't want to do well. They don't want growth. They don't want to have a lot of people from out of state. They don't want to have low energy prices. Nevada does. Now let's talk Arizona. It grew by 5.06% last year. It's got very reasonable prices on the housing. Part of this is because people from California didn't want to pay California prices in Arizona. It has a very big retirement community. It's got exceptional weather. I think it's kind of hot. I've generally seen most of Arizona unreasonably hot, but Pima, and Maricopa counties both have air conditioning. They also have great air connections. Sky Harbor has made the greater Phoenix area very, very good. Now, why is the crime low? It's because Arizonans want it low. They also pack heat. Now, I'm saying they have guns. All right. That's what I'm really getting at. They have excellent healthcare, and people are willing to spend on it. The cancer treatment centers, chiropractic, dental, medical, it's got a lot going on in the state. It doesn't just have to be Phoenix and Maricopa County. So Arizona has surprisingly done well over the long term. Do I think it's going to continue? Well, I worry a little about it because there's a lot of Californication going on in Arizona. It may not stay that way, but for now, I think it is going to be a family-friendly place, good place to retire, have good jobs. Now let's talk about the obvious place, Utah. I moved out of California to Utah. Last year, it grew at about 5%. Outdoor recreation is kind of amazing if you've ever been here. Now, a lot of people are coming to Utah, looking around, particularly southern Utah, the St. George area, Hurricane, and they're going, I like it. Very low crime because it doesn't tolerate much crime. Now, great Salt Lake City does have higher crime, but for the most part, the rest of the state says no. Utah County does not like crime. Housing is moderately priced given the growth. Now, Utah County, for example, really big boom in housing. But what they've done is they've made small lots and built houses on them and tried to keep the price of the housing moderate. It's not a place to go to build your McMansion anymore. It's got exceptional air connections. I don't know if you've heard about the brand new Salt Lake City airport. Amazing. Silicon Slopes is a real thing. Talking about Silicon Valley. Well, Utah's got Silicon Slopes. There are more engineers. You can't swing a dead cat without an engineer. I know. Now, it's also got very large and very developed affordable universities. True, the University of Utah can be a little pricey, but BYU and Utah Valley University, where I teach, have done everything they can to keep prices low and to make sure they keep their reasons for people to come there high. Healthcare schools are on the rise. We have got so many nursing schools, medical schools, dental schools that are just growing because it's part of the local ethic. They're very much into it. And with the growth of the population, they can afford these kinds of educational engagements. And I've been very impressed. In fact, I work at UVU. UVU has, it's Utah Valley University, has just increased its medical schools, dental programs, hygiene schools, nursing schools. It's kind of amazing. Now let's talk Texas. Texas grew at 3.85% last year. It's a big state with very low taxes. Now, one of the reasons why Texas is the way it is because the legislature is not year-round. It meets for a month, they veto everything, and then they go home. I know that may sound kind of silly, but it's true anyway. They don't like to spend a lot of money as a state. It's accessible from almost every part of the country. It's in the middle of the country. The weather is great. The housing is generally affordable. There are exceptions, but for the most part, it's got a little something for everyone. So when you look at the various cities that are existing in Texas, there's not just one metro area to go to. It's got several. Now, I've bragged about South Carolina for a while. 3.81% growth. The weather is pretty good. I mean, sure, it goes through some storms. I got that. And you'll see a hurricane or two. But the retirement is excellent there. Family-friendly values. They're very good about moving people from out of state into South Carolina. If you haven't been there, I strongly recommend it. Crime is mostly low. Housing is regionally a bargain. So on the East Coast right now, if you want a house, South Carolina is good. Taxes are moderate. And I have seen so much job growth in educated markets. It's fantastic. If you can join a practice in South Carolina, consider yourself lucky. Now, by the way, I should go back. North Carolina has been very impressive. I didn't want to really leave it off in states, but I just think it's great. Texas and Florida are doing well, obviously, and they're doing well because they're affordable housing, very low taxes. Retiring to Texas and Florida, of course, it's easy. But the two states people tend to forget are Tennessee and North Carolina. Tennessee has three parts: East, Center, and West. I consider Tennessee doing particularly well in the eastern part of the state, and I like what I'm seeing in North Carolina. Just about everywhere, they're really developing well. North and South Dakota surprises the heck out of everybody. They don't expect it to be a big job market, but I think it looks very promising. I think the energy market in North and South Dakota, it's going to make a comeback, and within 2 years. It's not going to be a thing where people will wait for a new president. Mississippi could be surprising, maybe. Now, I say that because it really is an energy state. It's got warm weather. Prices are really low, but it's got a bit of poverty that has kept it not desirable. I'm keeping my eye on Mississippi. I know you're going, what? Mississippi? Trust me, it's a thing to look at. You didn't get onto this podcast because you already had the answers, right? All right. Now, there is a thing that I refer to as the empty quarter of the United States. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but here's what it really is. It's from the Rockies to the Appalachians. They call that the empty quarter. It's the empty part of the United States that right now is primarily agricultural. People are complaining all the time. Well, there's no agriculture in the country. Oh, there is in the empty quarter. There's also a rising amount of employment and manufacturing. If anything, I think people from Asia are going to find the empty quarter and buy land like crazy if they haven't already. The mandate is from Asia. A lot of people are saying, I want to send my money and I want to send my children to America. And the empty quarter is one of the places they're going to go. Now, they understand Greater Seattle and Oregon, and that's where a lot of East Asian families have moved. But I think the empty quarter, that's going to change, particularly with more blue-collar employment and land investment. I think that's going to turn out to surprise everybody. I want to talk about three places. And it's not that these places are where I want you to rush out to, but I want you to understand they're showing serious promise. Pella, Iowa. P-E-L-L-A, Iowa. It's 40 miles southeast of Des Moines. It's a small town, but people universally are showing very good land value investments. Jobs are plentiful. People are investing locally. And I think Pella, Idaho may be one of those places that someday you'll say, hey, he told me about Pella. Now, this is going to shock the heck out of you. Beverly Hills, California. Yeah, they're rich. Yeah, they're educated. And yeah, it's centrally located in Southern California. Yeah, I know. Really. Now, it is a place that was overbuilt and overemployed. But remember, Beverly Hills is close to UCLA. It's not really that far from USC. It's got lots of commute availability. In other words, you can get to Beverly Hills very easily. The quality of life is exceptional. It ain't cheap. I understand that. But if I look for places that show promise, based upon the other factors that I've mentioned, you got to take into account Beverly Hills and the area surrounding it, not just the city of Beverly Hills. But consider this, if you haven't before, it might be worth looking at. Now, University Place, Texas, which is in South Houston, it's near Rice University. It's rich, it's well-educated, it's empty, and it is a good investment. Now, these are three places that right now you'd never think, oh, these are the places I had to go. I'm telling you this because you're the smart one who decided to listen to this podcast. No, I'm not promising anything, but I'm saying these are three sites that are going to show some potential. I'm almost reluctant to bring this one up. Draper, Utah, you can throw a rock from my house and hit Draper. And the city of Harriman included. It's a new city development north of the point of the mountain. Now, for those people in Utah, you know where the point of the mountain is. They've got the prison right there, and the prison is emptying out. They're going to a site north of the new airport in Salt Lake City. It will triple in size in 2 years, and they're building what they call a walking community. You'll be able to walk from one end of the city to the other in about 20 minutes. They've done it by how they've created the town. And it's not just that Draper is that big a deal, and that's not the name of the town, the new city, but it is an example of what I think is coming up. And I think they're going to need dentists and physicians. I think it is not going to be a hospital site. There will be a hospital there, but I think it is going to be a place for healthcare practices. And I would just be remiss if I wasn't telling you about what I'm seeing there. Harriman too. They call the area, the region, the West Valley. And I think it's going to show potential. And I don't know, you're probably thinking, gosh, Scott, why are you talking all about Utah? Well, I just drove through Cedar City. That's where Mike Green lives. And not much there today, but it's got a university and there is huge growth coming. It's a regional hotspot on the horizon. So do I think it's going to exceed the Southern Utah other communities? Yes, because I think it's got room to grow and there's a huge desire for it. Now, I've given you my thoughts, and I want you to understand you can look at several locations at once, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it because I don't think the quick view report is located on our website. However, if you call and beg Mike Green, he'll tell you how you can get a quick view report. They're less expensive, but it's very good if you're looking at several sites at once. I'm bringing it up to try to make Mike's life hard. I'm just kidding. But I want you to go to drdemographics.com. Give us a call at 800-849-0499. Don't be influenced by people who are going to sell you cheap reports or places that don't have much insight. The insights on these locations are good because we've visited there. I want to thank all of you for watching. I look forward to talking to you sometime in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.